It's on. Great. Good morning. We had one good morning. Buongiorno. Thanks for coming. Friday morning. We are happy to be here. See some familiar faces in the room, but not everyone. We're going to advance the slides first. That's how we start. We are going to do maybe 15 or 20 minutes talking about the issue. We're trying to focus the conversation. I'm nominally moderating, or we're co-moderating, I think. We can only fit 3 of us at a table, so this worked. Yeah. Really what we want to get into, and we'll do introductions as we go. I will do a quick introduction. Ben Wordmuller will go second. Apasna Gautam will go third. We'll each speak for probably 5 minutes. We'll have a little conversation, then we'll open up to questions. We have a mic for the crowd, and we want to probably spend a good amount of the session on that because it's a discussion. We just want to set up that discussion and sort of jump into it. So my name's Damon Kiesow. I'm currently the night chair in journalism at the Missouri School of Journalism. Important to say that before that I spent 30 years in industry. Most recently, which was 7 years ago now, so that's not that recent, I was director of product for the McClatchy News Group in the US, which medium-sized news group, owns about 30 newspapers, big and small across the country. I left during one of our industry's very famous reorganizations and landed very happily in the Midwest, which I'm thinking of moving to Perugia now because the scenery's
it's a little bit nicer?
It's a little nicer here. Don't tell them I said that. This is not being live streamed or anything like that. So here's the real quick setup on the discussion, then I'll jump in. There's a tension between big tech and journalism, right? We talk about it a lot. We talk about it in a bunch of different ways. We want to zero in on a couple of specific ways to think about it and talk about it. It can be navigated, has been navigated. It's been navigated by journalists most commonly in the past through our failures to deal with that tension. I should hold on to the remote instead of the water. So let's start off as journalists. Let me ask a question to the room first, since we don't know everyone. I'm going to ask 3 questions. If you identify more as a product type person in journalism, technologist who works in or adjacent to journalism, or as a journalist, which do you identify most strongly with? You can raise your hand more than once if you have to. Who in the room identifies most strongly as a product-y type person? That's a good turnout. I see some people waiting to raise their hand twice already. Journalist? That's another third of the room. How about technologist? Oh. That's not quite a third of the room, but like, okay. I would raise my hand for product, and I was in journalism for 20 or 30 years, not technologist. And I think even on the panel, that Venn diagram of the 2 skills and not always the full 3, so to speak, is probably pretty well represented. So, okay. Good to know, and I think we can get into some deeper discussion about this sort of question of ethics and values in tech. So, like, I want to head off assumptions that are often made in this discussion, which is when we're talking about the problems with technology and journalism, we're being anti-technology or we're being anti-innovation, right? Journalists, meaning individuals, very often being accused of not being innovative. 100% untrue. Journalism has always been very innovative. We teach this in class. Reporting methods, business models, distribution. We used to deliver the news by carrier pigeon, right? All these sorts of things. We've been very innovative. It's not about innovation. It's about how does the innovation work to support the journalism instead of constraining the journalism, right? Journalism is a completely different. News is a different business, is a different service than many other services that run on technology, on digital, right? We're about creating knowledge. That's a very special role. That's why we're here. It's a very special role in society. Not most businesses, I'm putting air quotes, businesses, that's not their mission, to create knowledge. That should be our mission. On the other hand, the reason that's not the business model, the mission of most organizations is because it's hard to do. It's not often as lucrative as it could be, and journalism is in a market failure, right? In the US, certainly, as well as other places. An argument we're going to come back to, and I'll just mention briefly here, is one of the reasons we're in a market failure is because the barriers to creating, distributing, and accessing information have fallen. Gen AI has been that last domino to fall. The web made it easy to distribute, marginally free, right? The iPhone or the mobile phone made it marginally free for you to access, because even with the web, you had to be at home with a landline, and it's time, expense. Generative AI now makes it possible to create information at zero cost, right? Not news, right? Not journalism, but information, right? So in the attention economy, that's what we're competing against. Journalism's weird, right? We're an information good, right? Meaning we can be copy to paste, shared, so to speak, at no cost. But the industry for 100 plus years was built on an industrial model, especially in newspapers. Broadcast was the same. You had to have broadcast licenses and towers and all this equipment. It was built on an industrial model, but it was always an information good. Now the information age is here, right? All those defensive moats we had around geography, creation, distribution, monopoly in a local market have evaporated, right? So we have none of those things that allowed us to make money, right? And so we've adopted the model that does work, adopted poorly, the model that does work, which is big technology, digital technology makes money at scale. There's no artisanal Googles, right, that only serve a small community. That's just not a thing, because we're making money mostly on programmatic advertising. You make money on advertising by having more readers. The town I work and live in now has 120,000 people. We're not going to scale. We're not going to make money on that model. So as we adopt the tools and the technology of digital, right, we're in conflict almost immediately. So as I hand off to Ben, this thing we want to talk about is we should be using technology. Obviously, everyone's digital. Everyone's consuming our information digitally. But if we don't believe in something as journalists, if we don't believe in the values of journalism, if we don't believe in the values of community news, we're going to fall for anything, meaning we're going to adopt tech that conflicts with our mission, harms our community, doesn't serve our bottom line. I'll just throw out and see everyone sort of cringe the pivot to video as an example. How many people? A couple. Okay, we had a couple of recognitions there. So those are the SPJ bullet points on ethics, and we're going to talk a little bit more about how, as we're embedding technology in our organizations, these journalistic values need to be the filters, need to be the guiding lights through which we're considering the value and the constraints that come along with technologies. Ben.
Thanks. Can I ask you a quick question? You mentioned Gen AI as a
Yes.
thing that lowers the cost of information.
Yes.
Do you think it's a good thing in news?
I don't think it's a good thing in news. My controversial, not to be taken entirely seriously point on this is, if I was running a newspaper right now, I would brand it Zero AI was involved in the creation of this publication. Not that that's realistic, but I think if we looked at the Reuters Institute poll recently, they said most editors are going to start using Gen AI, and they also said most editors think Gen AI reduces the trust in the journalism, which seems like an odd conflict to be making both claims. So.
But you also mean, like, this is specifically in the content creation problem space, or do you mean across the board, workflow optimization, productivity?
So that's a nuanced question.
It is.
Yeah. Certainly on the content, but if I was going to have to make a decision yes or no, I would say no, which is not a decision we would make, but yes. Certainly back end's fine, yeah. Sorry.
No, thank you. Thank you for going into that. I think it's one of the most important topics in news technology right now. Hey everyone, I'm Ben Wertmuller. I'm the Senior Director of Technology at ProPublica, which is a nonprofit newsroom in the US reporting on abuses of trust in the public interest. My background, though, is actually in open source startups and building kind of open technology, which you might be able to discern from what I'm going to talk about. So I want to start by saying this. There is no such thing as neutral technology. We often talk about technology as being neutral, logical, deterministic. We're sort of taught that, I think, a little bit by Hollywood and by culture. But in reality, software is a creative work, right? Just as journalism is a creative work. People make it. It's made by people. Every design and engineering decision is a reflection of their goals, their values, their strategy, their skills, their resources, their funding even, and honestly their foibles as people, right? It's all a reflection of the human beings who make it. And what they consider to be unimportant is just as crucial as what they consider to be important. Technology encodes power relationships, and those relationships grow as platforms grow. So when we get, the power relationships are there in very small tech. When you get to big tech, the volume is turned right up on those relationships. So if a team values revenue from targeted advertising but doesn't value user privacy, it could find itself, just for example, building a surveillance network that could later be used by a government to deport students who happen to click a like on an Instagram post, which is a real thing that's happening. If a team doesn't contain doesn't contain people from a diversity of backgrounds, it might find itself building algorithms that penalize people of color, or platforms that are unsafe for vulnerable users. And if a team values hockey stick growth but doesn't place value on local relationships, it might even find itself enabling a genocide, which Facebook did in Myanmar. So in journalism, we have a duty of care to our communities, right? We've got to be good stewards of the safety of sources who reach out to us. If a federal employee in the US, right, sends us information we use for a story, we have to be able to keep them anonymous. And we've got to be good stewards of the people who read our information. If a person reads about where to get, for example, contraceptive health care from our website, we must not capture data about them that could lead to a prosecution, which again is a real risk. And we've got to be good stewards of our journalists and of our donors and the people who put themselves on the line for us so the truth can be told. If someone donates to us, for example, that information must not be usable against them. So we've got a really strong duty of care to all of these people in our community. But, as Damon said, most of the tech used in journalism, from analytics, hosting, ad tech, content management, and so on, isn't made by journalists on newsrooms. It comes with a different set of values, right? And when we evaluate technology to bring into the newsroom, whether it's vendors or software libraries or protocols that we build into our own homegrown tools, we need to consider a bunch of things. How well its capabilities meet our needs. Obviously, we must be human-centered. Not everybody is, but it's really important to keep those human needs front and center. How well its cost meets our available resources. How well its form and underlying assumptions meet our values. Whether its benefits outweigh the risks. There's always risks. Do the benefits outweigh those? And I think most crucially, who benefits from those power dynamics that are being encoded. So when we do a technology assessment, if we do one at all, and we don't always in news, we're not often asked to consider the values fit of a technology and its vendor. But if we fail to examine those things, they can really come back to bite us. So for example, if we're evaluating ChatGPT, which a lot of people are right now, we must not just decide whether we're comfortable with LLMs, which is a question in its own right, but also if we trust OpenAI, and whether we're comfortable with how it was built and trained, what happens to our data when we use it. They've poured a lot of money everywhere into making sure we're really hyped about it, to make sure that we feel like if we're not using it, we're going to be left behind somehow. But we really have to ask ourselves that question: who made it, who benefits, and whose values does it encode? Most newsrooms can't build much of their own software. Like, unless you're really, really big, you probably don't have much of that capability. But we absolutely can ensure that we use our own data and use software on our own terms. We can do things like use third-party key encryption so that they physically can't access our data without our permission. This is available as an option for many of the tools you already use: Google Workspace, Slack, Airtable, etc. All of those offer that as an option that you can get. And we can use values-aligned open source software, and we really should, even if we pay their vendors to manage it for us. So, we're all familiar with these, proprietary social networking platforms. Please take a look at Mastodon, right? Like, take a look at these open platforms that are much more values-aligned for us, right? They're a really solid alternative to the sort of surveillance-based status quo. CMSs like WordPress and Ghost give us much more freedom than those proprietary solutions that lock us in, right? It gives us the ability to be much more flexible with our presence on the internet and gives us the ability to really build software that aligns with our values. I would argue there's another thing that we can do, though. Possibly most powerfully, I would like to propose that we can collaborate as newsrooms and build software together to better fit our collective values, right? Here in the EU, governments are already building very highly functional collaboration suites to avoid giving money to US companies. The French and German governments collaborated quite recently to come up with something called Docs, which is a lovely collaboration platform. It really feels like a first-class consumer-grade platform, and we can do this too. Right? There's no reason why we can't come together and build tools for our needs. We have to come together without going through VC-funded tech companies with leaders and strategies that might not reflect our values. News does not have to rely on tools owned by other people. We can build and own the platforms that carry us. And that's really the proposal and the message I want to give today.
Before we jump, let me ask, you said duty of care, which I thought is a great way to describe this. What is the duty of care when you're using like Google Docs? You talked about that, or Google's entire cloud infrastructure. How do you assess the risks of a service which is so ubiquitous and possibly unknowable?
I mean, you certainly can't look at the underlying technology, right? What you can do is assess, think about where the data goes, right? Assess the flow of data, assess their priorities, their funding, assess the legal agreements that you're making with them, which is really a set of permissions for what they can do with your data, and then ask a lot of those same questions. We actually had at ProPublica an issue fairly recently. We do use Google Workspace internally with client-side encryption. They just randomly turned on AI for us one day. We got into work and we discovered that all these journalists who are writing these very sensitive stories suddenly were getting suggestions from Gemini. And that's because some product manager really needed to juice their numbers, right, internally. And we, had the ability to get on the phone and yell at them, which we did. But their incentive is to get as many people as possible onto these features so they can demonstrate that to their own investors, to their board, et cetera. So technology is always about humans and always about human dynamics. Like assessing those interests is always the way to go.
I have one more question. You talked about the collaboration effort that we see in Europe, not in the United States, and I think there's been some attempts to do that in the United States. Where do we start? Is that a capitalism problem? Is that to create something that's truly shared and open source for our industry? Right. I mean, it sounds all great in theory, and I think a lot of us actually want to do it.
But what's the incentive?
Seriously, what's the incentive? Because capitalism.
I mean, I think it's as much a Stockholm Syndrome problem as it is a capitalism problem. I think the news in particular tends to treat technology as like something that happens to it, like an asteroid. And in fact, it's something that we can build and own. And I think really it's about cultural change. It's about someone needs to do it first, right? Like there needs to be, in the same way that now that governments have come together in the EU and built these suites, that wasn't true 5 years ago. They were building together. They weren't always the most beautiful software, like it often felt a little bit clunky. That has changed, and now that opens the floodgates for other people to do the same. If we do it in news, if all it takes is one group to do it, come together and do it well, then other people will have sort of that social permission to do it as well. I think the benefit is the de-risking. And so it's going to be, I think, probably non-profit newsrooms that do it first. I think it's going to be folks who work on more sensitive stories because they have those greater security risks, those greater concerns about information leaking out, particularly, honestly, in the current political environment in the US. Like, you do not want the current administration to get access to stories you're writing about them before the fact. You do not want them to get access to those sources. And so that really increases the security bar, but it also increases the incentive to build an alternative.
Let's do it.
All right.
Hi, everyone. My name is Upasana Gautam, based out of Austin, Texas, in the United States. My 9 to 5, I'm a senior platform product manager at CNN. So my team builds the core technology platform that powers the front end and the back end of CNN, including all of our editorial, tooling, features, workflows, the rendering infrastructure, digital asset manager, developer tools. All of those products sit on our platform, our core platform called Stellar, which is actually derived from the word storyteller. And I've been there for about 5.5 years doing that. And then I also serve as the chair of the board of directors for the News Product Alliance, an incredible community of product thinkers, technologists, anyone who works with them. So if you're interested in this conversation, you can learn a lot more through the News Product Alliance as well. Interestingly, I came out of, I have not been working in news for my whole career. I came from tech into news, and the 5.5 years I spent at CNN, I started writing for CNN, and I still, like, I have no problem calling myself a product manager, a technologist, anything in that realm, but I'm still, I like feel resistance of calling myself a journalist, but I'm a writer. So we talked a lot about, in true product thinking style, like the problem, the context of the problem, how we got here. I really want to dive into some of the tactics now. Like, why haven't we done this yet? Why are we still here? And I've kind of distilled it down into these two key themes of core problems to solve as an industry. One being, we have normalized building solutions based off of our assumptions, and two, we haven't taken the time to develop systems thinking. I'll get into each of these in a little more detail. So as journalists or product thinkers or technologists in this industry, we have a responsibility to serve our communities, our audiences, in whether that's at CNN and BBC or the hyperlocal newsroom serving a very, very nuanced community. And the most important thing we could do for our communities and the people we serve is to detach ourselves from them, because then we can go into thinking about what they need from a beginner's mindset and with curiosity, and ask smart questions and really start to uncover not just what problems are they facing, what information do they need, but why are those problems a problem in the first place? We are not the audience. We're never the audience. We're merely proxies for our audience. And it's our job to uncover, in true journalistic fashion, product thinking fashion, whatever framework you want to adopt, to uncover what they really need. What gets us in trouble and has gotten us in trouble is making assumptions about what they need, thinking we know what they need, and then going and building solutions off that, and then being like, oh shit, well, they don't like it. We got to talk to them. What's that? There's the quote, if you assume, it makes an ass out of me and you. This is kind of that situation. Assumptions are shortcuts that actually just create more risk and more wasteful resource expenditure, financial expenditure. And we talked about, Damon talked about at the top of our session, innovation isn't the problem. I would say the pace at which we move is part of the problem, because we'll take 10 steps, or we'll take 1 step forward and 10 steps backwards because of this building off of assumptions. We have the resources to innovate. We know how to innovate, but we're innovating based off of, again, assumptions. We have to create a culture that fosters question asking, challenging assumptions, and then being able to validate those assumptions. That's the highest leverage activity we have available to us right now, and it's dire. It is a time in our industry where creating that type of culture is the most important thing we can do. Relentlessly questioning not just what we build, but why we build it and who truly benefits, like Ben was talking about. Our most powerful safeguard against any sort of ethical failure, business failure, journalistic failure is our audience. And I mentioned before that culture of asking questions, digging deep, not accepting surface level answers. We have to think of that as not disruptive, but essential. It is a very, in big tech in Silicon Valley or any other, and I'm not saying everything they do is right, but they do one thing right, and that is relentlessly focusing on solving one specific problem for one specific audience and doing it really, really well, as opposed to trying to serve so many people and serving so many different solutions that end up serving nobody. So every technical decision, from a paywall design to a personalization algorithm, should start with this question: how does this feature create real value for my audience? And that comes from understanding the nuances of that community, of that audience. This is where user research is so incredibly critical to the product discovery process. And the thing is, it is not limited to technologists or product managers. This is a responsibility we all have to take on, no matter where we sit in the newsroom. That's through testing, through conversations that don't have to be formal, creating positive feedback loops between you and your audience. It doesn't have to be a, curated, formally set up user interview. There is absolutely power in that, but you as whether you're a journalist or an engineer or teaching these practices, understanding your audience and being able to converse in the language of the listener gets us closer to creating the right solutions. It's also essential for surfacing hidden risks or unintended harms of our technical decisions. This is the prerequisite to mitigating risk. When we get to a point where we understand what our audiences need, what they don't need, we can better understand how different systems work together, affect each other, impact each other, and also what are the trade-offs? What types of risks might surface if we do X but not Y? Again, asking lots of smart questions. So I mentioned systems thinking, and if you were in my session yesterday, apologies, this is I'm reiterating some of this from yesterday, but it is that critical to deeply grasp how different tech systems interconnect to serve journalistic goals. Develop full stack thinking. I love this term that I've been using for the last year of becoming a full stack journalist. So in tech, you'll hear full stack engineer, full stack product manager. All it means is understanding the front end and the back end of how systems are integrated and how they work. Granted, if you're a full stack engineer, you actually need to be able to develop it. But in this context, for a journalist, it is really understanding how decisions in one part of the system impacts others. And it's a proactive approach to ethics and high quality innovation, where we're not taking one step forward and 10 steps backwards, because we understand that the one thing we do here, this is how it impacts all of the other parts of the ecosystem. So that systems thinking is understanding how all of the parts are connected, from editorial intent to audience experience to the underlying technical infrastructure. And I talk a lot about what are the types of questions we should be asking. And when it comes to systems thinking, a great place to start are these 3 questions. I'm sorry, I didn't write this on my slide, but I can share them afterwards. One is, who are we unintentionally excluding with this feature? How might someone misuse or abuse this? What assumptions are we relying on? And what if they're wrong? This is a great place to start. This is like just scratching the surface of understanding the risk, how systems work together and unintended consequences of the technology that we're building. And this is more crucial than ever before, given that AI, Gen AI is becoming ubiquitous at this point. So before getting to a point of severe risk or a complete, reputational damage issue, these are the questions we easily can be asking and assessing before making a decision that locks us into something that harms us and even worse, our communities. And I think this goes back to, this idea of becoming a full stack journalist is really about becoming holistic, understanding the different parts of the puzzle. You can have your subject matter expertise in different areas, but truly understanding form and function is the unlock. Not to mention, this is really, really great for career development. It makes you more competitive, especially in this current economic situation we're in. So I'll leave you with that. There's one takeaway. It's think about systems and becoming full stack in whatever role that you have.
Very good. I had questions. Go.
I would love to ask you, so you talk about assumptions, right? And making assumptions about your audience. And actually, it's really interesting to me that news uses the word audience versus community. Audience implies a one-way relationship. Community implies a two-way relationship.
Good.
Very good point.
Yeah.
So do you think news has done a very good job of understanding who its audience is, rather? And if not, kind of why not?
I think there are some really great examples of it being done right, but if I would, looking at it collectively, no. And I think that goes back to, maybe it is, there are different, we are working in a different business model now than we were a decade ago. Social media, algorithmic feeds, advertising models things are rapidly changing. Consumer behavior is changing faster than it was, 5 years ago or 10 years ago. Consumption habits are changing all the time. So it is more of, we didn't maybe have to do it as much, or it wasn't as dire before because the pace of innovation was not as fast as it is right now. We have not been able to keep up with it. So in order to keep up with it, we have to keep up with our communities. And that is such amazing framing that you just said, that a community is supposed to be two-way and your audience is one-way. That says everything you need to know. Do you want an audience, or are you building a community? An audience is someone you're selling to. A community is a group of people sharing information. So it depends on what your goals are. I think I thought as a news industry and journalists, we're here to serve our communities. And we're here to be in care of those communities and give them the information they need in the most effective way. I think we haven't been able to speed that up to the speed of innovation. So we have to do it more. We need to, it comes down to relationship building, being curious and talking to people, and again, not making the assumptions. And I think the assumptions have lasted longer now and that has become more problematic, whereas before we knew because the data was kind of categorized better. We had TV, you had a newspaper, you had your website. Social media changed all of that. Gen AI has changed that even further.
Let me ask maybe another show of hands question, because all of the questions that, I had some good questions, but now I have more good questions, so it's problematic, because we have 20 minutes left. Who in the room who's in or adjacent to a newsroom has a mission statement or a value statement that guides editorial work? Like most people, right, who are in a newsroom, maybe. How many feel like that values or mission statement or set of ethics applies to other departments in the organization? That's impressive. Then I see some, we have maybe what's your CPO? CTO. So that's a good position to have someone who cares about product and ethics, right? Because you can that's not the case in many organizations, and that's one of the problems think Apazno is getting at is, we'll see if this is a question. As an academic now, I can ask questions that are actually statements. It's one of the privileges of that. It's awesome. When we were in more of the industrial model, I would argue, and the editor or the publisher, say of a newspaper, was the last gatekeeper in the line. Business decisions, advertising, anything that happened up until that point was still controlled at the end of the day by the publisher or the editor. Stop the press, take the ad off the page, you don't want a Delta ad on a page with a plane crash, that kind of equation. All that stuff now happens dynamically, real time, largely by vendors outside of our control. No one in the room, unless you're a ridiculous expert, can tell me why a specific ad appeared on a specific page. I used to deal with this all the time. How do we make this, how do we de-risk in an organization which is not just a newsroom, it's all these other pieces, where maybe not everyone agrees that there's a risk, to Ben's point. So I'll throw that to Ben first. How do we de-risk if we don't want to agree there's a risk?
I mean, you've just described my life. Yeah, I mean, it's hard. Like, so much of this is about evangelism and really about sort of sharing storytelling, honestly, about what the risks actually are. And it's, it can be real, you can feel a little bit like a sort of Cassandra, right? Like, it's kind of I used to yell all the time about Facebook, right? Facebook, oh my gosh, like it is this central conduit, everyone's getting their information from it, and like, this is gonna be a real problem. And people were like, no, look, we got audience, this is really great, we got reach, like easier than we ever had before, fantastic. And then, right, there's this moment where everyone was like, oh. And that happens again and again and again. So you've got to find kind of the stories and really share them internally. I am known as the person who brings nightmares in the newsroom, unfortunately. And I can be a little bit of a bummer because of that. But but you do have to bring the newsroom along, and putting it through the lens of the people, of that duty of care, is the way that I've found to be most effective at it, right? We need to be good stewards of our sources. Everyone agrees with that. We need to be good stewards of our journalists. Certainly the journalists agree with that, right? And so being able to take that and sort of explain, okay, here's what's happening and here's what could happen, and here's some of the things that have happened. Like, we get, at ProPublica, we collect subpoenas like stickers, right? And so being able to share kind of those stories about what happens when someone subpoenas, and how easy it is for someone to subpoena for your data behind the scenes, which is very easy. Those examples really help. But everything comes down to storytelling and bringing a community along.
I think also from a technology building perspective, I mean, the outcome of that doesn't have to be, we're not doing it.
Right.
It can be, how do we build safeguards to make this work for our needs? Mm-hmm. So we were talking about the example earlier, my team built a lot of features for the editorial team that works on our CNN homepage, where the bottom half of the homepage, a lot of it is automatically, dynamically generated through a lot of workflows that we created, where an editor can select different data parameters and populate that container with anything from a specific beat to personalization to what's trending to something as simple as a time range, and mix and match those parameters, because what that does is it relieves that programming editor of manual labor on a part of the homepage that perhaps isn't as important, or if there's really big breaking news happening, they don't have time to manually program that part of the page. So they can set it up, and I wouldn't say it's set it and forget it, because here's where the safeguard comes into place, is we've built in features in that workflow that very quickly allow an editor to come in and make changes or override anything there in case something automatically pops up that should not be there, right? And at the same time, they can focus on, they can make that change within seconds and then quickly go back up and work on, the main part of the homepage that they were programming, like, the presidential election or something like that. So I think it helps you evaluate trade-offs. It helps you optimize workflows. And so it's not like about, we don't shut it down.
Right.
It is, let's talk about how do we build this better to make sure it doesn't to de-risk.
Yeah. Questions? We have a mic, I think, in the back that we can run up. Mike, right here on the aisle first, and then second.
Hi, thank you so much. It was so interesting. I have a lot of questions, but we'll just pick one. What we've been talking about, especially in academia and newsrooms, about ethics and technologies is transparency. But in my very own vision, maybe transparency is not enough for people. What is your opinion about that, and how do you see these questions in the newsrooms or in your school of journalism?
And do you mean transparency?
Towards the public.
So from the newsrooms,
Yes.
being transparent
Yes.
about, and I'm guessing that may be driven by a Gen AI question. Are we using
Gen AI
not-
questions and even algorithmic decisions. I mean, when you're selecting
yeah.
the most read or pieces for you.
It's a great point. Yeah.
Thanks.
Transparency is part of the puzzle. It certainly helps to build trust, but actually, it's definitely not enough. Like, you have to demonstrate that you are, behaving in a values-aligned way with your community. If you're transparent and you demonstrate that you aren't, you run into trouble. And that has happened with us. We ran a piece relatively recently about how we were using Gen AI in the newsroom, and our audience eviscerated us on social media for it. I think, I'll say it quietly, quite rightly, because it was, we hadn't really considered sort of the ethical and the power dynamic issues that people are really worried about. That wasn't represented in the piece. It was represented kind of in a lot of the internal newsroom, culture and dynamics, but the transparency actually, by just sort of telling the facts of that story, kind of missed that, missed some of that, and actually it's a bit of a, ethics is sometimes a bit of a scary story to tell. So I think you have to be, again, you got to know what the audience wants. That's what it comes down to. Like, you can't assume that they're just like, oh yay, AI. You got to come in and really have a strong, nuanced understanding of what they really care about and address everything, including that transparency, through that lens.
And not every problem warrants an AI solution.
Very true.
Or a tech solution.
Or even a tech solution, yes,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah. Next question, but let me do my quick answer to that would be, none of that transparency work matters if you don't already have the trust to start with.
It's everything.
Because if I'm explaining, and I don't have the trust, then it sounds like I'm making excuses as opposed to explaining.
This was a question for Ben. I found you're talking about collaborative tech building across newsrooms really inspiring. But to challenge an assumption that I thought was kind of underlying how you talked about it, it seemed as if you thought it had to happen within the US, almost in a siloed way from Europe. And can't a shared ethical framework be more powerful than a shared legal framework and bring sort of a cross-border collaboration there?
Yes, and I did not mean to imply that. Absolutely. Like, it can be cross-border. And frankly, Europe is far better at open source software than the US is. So there's a lot more support for it, both in terms of communities and literal funding. So I think actually it has to be that way. And I think, to be honest, that American organizations could learn ethically a lot from the European organizations a lot as well. So like, I think absolutely, and potentially Europe can lead the way here too.
To clarify, I'm based in the UK, so I can't claim any of the good European vibes.
Oh, alas.
Other questions? Yes, sir.
Hi, question for Upasana. As you're talking about audiences' needs, this often comes up in the context of what kind of change we want to see in the world, or what kind of outcome we want to have become visible. sometimes talking to journalists about that idea can bring up the idea of advocacy, that what we're actually trying to do is change someone's mind, and that can often turn the conversation in a different direction. I'm wondering if you have some advice for how to navigate that.
How to change people's minds. So interestingly, so my audience, my customers are our journalists, producers, and editors.
Internal.
They are internal, and they are a tough crowd, and I love working with them. One of their greatest fears is, as I think this is not just at CNN, this is everywhere, is introducing any sort of machine learning integration is going to mean their job's at risk. So I think coming at it from this is the problem we're solving for you so that you can focus on the most important aspects of your job, like framing it as I'm here to help you. I'm here to help solve this problem for you by delivering XYZ features is one way that, it sets the stage. And then also bringing them along in our product discovery and product development has been like everything. They have learned product thinking. They have learned design thinking. It's not just, here's what we made, give us some feedback. It's more of like, we're going to do a user interview. We're going to we're going to bring you into a design sprint. We're going to do collaborative jam sessions on the prototype and make them feel so seen and heard that they feel like they built it with us. I've told many of our editors who I worked very closely with when we were taking Stellar from 0 to 1, you should be putting on your resume that you co-created this. Like, not that you helped with it, like you actually informed and helped execute this. That trust that we focused on instilling in our relationship dynamic in the project from day one, it is dual-pronged. One is it makes your job easier and easier over time, because up front, when you take the time to do that, I don't spend my time proving things to them anymore. They trust me enough to know that the decisions that we're making are the right ones, while still, not blindly, but still having discourse about it, but also that we're able to iterate we're able to rapidly iterate now because of it. If we want to make a change, it doesn't take weeks. It takes a couple of days and we can get it into the next sprint, right? The feedback loops have become very short and very tight. So that rapid iteration, rapid deployment, we talk about the pace of innovation changing. We're able to keep up with it because the trust is there. They understand what problem we're solving and why we're solving it, and they know exactly how it's going to impact their workflow. Not that we're trying to remove them from the process, but actually we're trying to give more time back to them so they can focus on things like strategy and direction and analysis, and not clicking 10 buttons just to see a preview, right? So it's like, how do we make that time to action also so short for them that they don't have to worry about workflow stuff. That is, and I think that those lessons can be applied to external audience too. Helping them understand, we're doing this because we understand this is a problem for our community, and this is how we're going to help solve it. I think it's being extremely explicit about that, especially, Gen AI use is one great example of, not every community needs an article summary, what is that just the thing to do now? But the Texas Tribune has a great example of this, where they leverage, I think, Notebook LM to create. We're in Texas, large Spanish-speaking populations, and some of them don't know how to read English very well, but they can understand it. So they did do transcription on a lot of their articles, but they used it as a test, and they experimented. I think that's another thing that we didn't even touch on today, is healthy risk-taking, experimentation, and being comfortable with iterating upon experimentation, or being like, hey, that didn't work. We're gonna sunset it and move on. And I think that is a culture also that we really need to cultivate.
I think we have time for one more quick question. I say hand.
Hi.
That was good.
Hello. Oh, sunglasses falling off my head. Thank you. So we talked about audience and we talked about community, and I wanted to throw the word user into the mix. do journalists do enough to think about their audiences as users? Should they? You're scrunching your face up.
There's so much debate around user as a term, yeah.
Yeah, that's my question.
I'll grab that one. I don't know, you all can argue with this later. I don't know that journalists think that much about audience in a lot of cases. And when we're thinking about through the lens of product, we do think about users. And I think that sort of the argument we had briefly about, is it community, is it audience, is it user? At some level of analysis, that's the same, but it defines a very different relationship, right? So I think by user, you're meaning like, what's the user experience? Needs. So the question I was going to ask next that we don't have time for, which is like, what's the job of news? Posna talked about jobs to be done yesterday as one way through that wicket. Absolutely.
And with that too, like you were talking about, it's kind of synonymous and contextual, but really what is the most important thing to understand about any of those groups is what are the most important actions they need to be able to complete, so the jobs to be done.
Yeah.
And you know, the question yesterday in our panel was about, you know, a woman asked a great question about personas and like, isn't that problematic? And I was like, yeah,
like,
I hate
no,
personas.
no,
Yeah.
like that is, we don't do that anymore. You're literally like, you know, perpetuating stereotyping, and so, and also we're humans. We are not black and white. You can't just throw a bunch of people into one category and say this is Jill from New York who does X, Y, Z, and it's the same as Upasna from Austin, Texas. Like just because we have certain qualities that are similar on paper, you know. So jobs to be done, I really like, is because it's very workflow action based, and it's like, here's what this group of people need right now to make their lives easier, or here's the information they need to answer their question. So it's, yeah, action-oriented.
And I'd love to talk about that more after. And we are out of time. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Damn, these things fly by so fast.
Yeah,
I know.
that was fast.
50 minutes is not a lot.
to talk about.
I know.